Welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to start off our next talk, if that's possible, please. Lovely. I'm delighted to introduce you to Otto Saumarez-Smith, who is an architectural historian and trustee of the 20th Century Society. As we've said before, everyone's bio is in the booklet, so do take a look and read a bit more. And he's going to talk a bit more about Basil Champneys and the politics of prettiness, which we heard a little bit more about earlier this morning.
Thank you. I've got 15 minutes, but I'm just going to say a wonderful last paper with beautiful images. Rita, thank you. And the plan, I don't know if you noticed, there's quite an interesting bit of social history there. That Newnham has bathrooms from the beginning. It was good to see that. The anecdote that's told about that to me by Gavin Stamp was around the same time when Bodley was building in King's College. He goes to the fellows and says, should I put in a bathroom? And they said, my dear chap, the terms are only 8 weeks long. They can have a bath when they get home. As it happens, this is apocryphal. Michael Hall's biographer, Michael Hall, Bodley's biographer, says that there were only ever discussions, and they came down a bit on earth rather than water closets. Bathrooms only, but men only got bathrooms, significantly into the 20th century. John's, it was a site quite a long way away where Cripps now is. Robinson College being the first college to have ensuite, but for conferences, not for student hygiene. So it was a long journey, but Newnham was here first, and it was nice to see that on the thing. Why am I here? Captain Concrete, lover of 20th century architecture, described in the press once as a concrete sniffing, I won't say in front of a nice audience, but there it is. Why am I here? I love the Basil Champneys buildings. I think it might have been slightly, when I came to, I'm the world expert on the British car park. And coming to the end of my PhD, I'd sort of come, and I think this is the most beautiful place, and Champneys architecture is absolutely wonderful. I had a rather, I hadn't realised it was a date, and it was a slightly awkward. I was invited to Christmas dinner, and I only learnt as we were sitting down that it was bring your own wine. And I had to eat the Christmas dinner without any wine. It was but I was brought along by the lovely curlicues and cherubs around me to sort of lighten things up, and so I absolutely adore it. And I had a fantasy at some point that I'd write a book about Champneys as a sort of, as a break from all the concrete. It's a really lovely website where you can make, you can make your own Penguin classic. It's not. I haven't done nearly enough work on it, not to, so it's not coming out with Penguin. Someone once misunderstood this and was like, how did you manage that? But this is a pleasurable thing that I do about all the books that I'd like to write, but haven't. The politics of prettiness, I mean, why I haven't done the work, and some of this talk is going to explain why I failed to do it, and I'm very aware that there are lots of people who know a lot about it. But I mean, one of the things that really attracted me about this style and this moment, coming from modernism, where you've got a style which is not a proxy for political ideas, but becomes associated with them. And I think the Queen Anne revival is one of these moments, but it's totally different in architecture. It's an architecture of swags and curlicues and prettiness, but this becomes the architecture for a certain type of progressive thought. I think, one of the, other places you see it, other than libraries and, women's education and board schools we've heard a bit about, it is pubs. And I think they're using it to try and get a bit of a sort of, make it sound okay, and a bit more of a highbrow thing than it actually is. So, I think the brewers get onto this. and it's a nice title, The Politics of Prettiness, but I'm saying that at the beginning, this is, I haven't actually done the work on this, but today is sort of inspiring, and maybe one day I will. I mean, one of the things that I think, I'd read Mark Giraud's Sweetness and Light, and it's done with such sort of grace that I thought, oh, there must be much more to say. And he only does Newnham in 6 pages, but I've been through, and actually it's all there, all of the arguments. Several other books, I think William White's Oxford Jackson was saying a lot of things that I wanted to say about the relationship between this style of architecture and what, to use Noel Annan's phrase about the sort of intellectual aristocracy and what they wanted from buildings. So I think my book, The Politics of Prettiness, has sort of already been done. But a few things about Champneys and sort of a curious, and this is something I don't understand, and I think it was really interesting. I mean, first thing, there are 2 masterpieces, Newnham and the Rylands Library in Manchester. I've been to all the churches I can, and I have to say, as a church architect, where he sticks to the Gothic, and he's got less sort of the excitement of the real sort of 1860s Goths, the sort of not quite the delicacy of Bodley or Jackson or the inventiveness of Shaw. But the thing, and why it would be a difficult book to write, and why I think the Champneys really does need at least one of the, at least a small biography, and it hasn't been done. Is that what's really interesting about him is his patrons, and we'll hear a bit about them here. But one of the things, and this I don't understand, and this is a mystery about Champneys, because it's no other Victorian architect is like this, is that he works for all different sorts of denominations. So Mansfield is, and the odd thing about that is that he's born like a lot of Victorian architects, is the son of a quite distinguished clergyman, and this was quite a good way in. And you'd expect all of the patrons, you go through that, and he was, did have lots of high church patrons, and worked on Manchester Cathedral. But I mean, is also able, to work for nonconformists, Mansfield, and I think, the other thing, the Politics of Prettiness thing, is that there is quite a lot of architecture, which is actually the architecture of imperialism. We've got the Indian Institute in Oxford up, and I haven't put a picture, but Champneys is a name associated with Oriel, with the Rhodes statue, which is causing lots of trouble, and Champneys is there. So I mean, these are all sorts of different types of patrons from different denominations and different political backgrounds, and I just don't get it. This is not the way Victorian architecture normally works. I don't think there's another example, and I haven't been, it's very, very difficult being an architecture historian of education at the moment, because you can no longer get into schools, and there's a sort of, they do not like it. So I've tried to see a few of the schools, but I mean, if one were to do this project, and I hope someone one day does it, what would be really interesting about it is to work out the patrons, and I'm sure there are wonderful archives, but to work out why imperialists and nonconformists and high church are like this person. I think here him coming is more obvious, and it's his ties to the intellectual aristocracy. The most interesting patron, and this is the church in the middle, is the Church of St Mary's Star of the Sea in Hastings, the interesting thing, and this is a Catholic church, and again, but very odd. Normally, Catholic churches are, you know, they go to Hardman, they go to the Pugin family. You know, they have their own people. But here, and the patron here is a really interesting one, and I haven't. This was one of the things that you know I'd like to look at more, because I think it's quite an interesting thing in terms of Newnham. So the patron here is Coventry Patmore, the poet, who you know is lambasted by anyone doing an English degree for his The Angel in the Home. You know, this is and Champneys was really, really close with Patmore, and writes his incredibly boring two-volume biography. I mean, Patmore has some interesting. He's a correspondent with Ruskin and a lot of the pre-Raphaelites. But to my knowledge, nobody has ever sort of made this connection of, and I think, you know, it might tell you something about what he's trying to do, Champneys, at Newnham, thinking about gender and thinking about the need for a domesticity. I think that's suggestive. And it's a sort of, it's nice actually, the other book, even more boring, by Champneys, of biographies of his mother-in-law, Adelaide Drummond, who's also a Catholic convert. And whatever stylistic diversity is something that Champneys does, but also he was able to get on with people from lots of different things. And I think, you know, if one were to do the proper archival work through these places, you'd understand that, and it'd be interesting. What do I have next? Oh, now, so this is one of the ways that I've sort of been, you know, having reached a dead end with Champneys. I've read this novel recently, and this is mainly a thing just to tell you. Has anybody read it? I mean, it's amazing. Nobody's read it. I'm really excited. I've got like you know, I've asked all the sort of I've asked all the people who should have read it, and I think this is sort of my discovery. It's 1932. Tim Britton Catlin would have read it, but I mean it's a 1932 novel by Helen Ashton about an architect. I don't, you know, who maps onto a lot of these people of this generation. I mean, he dies in 1932, the architect, or in the present. And I mean, what's really, it's an extraordinary thing. Helen Ashton was trained as a physician at University College, and has a real sort of, so she's really good on professionalization so this is her novel about an architect and his family, and it's got wonderful about those dates. I'm trying to work out who the sources might be, because it's very, very astute on the changes of architectural fashion and what it was like to be an architect right through these dates. Her father was a barrister. She worked in the medical profession. Her brother, and maybe this was the link, was Sir Lee Ashton, who was head of the V&A. So I think that was a way that she must have known these sorts of people. Anyway, it's very, very good that it starts with his training in this system with a Gothic revival architect, and who's actually quite good at the drains, and later on in his life he becomes more sympathetic towards him. But you know, it has this generational moment between him rejecting him, and you know, and he sees a building by Norman Shaw and becomes interested in a more eclectic approach to the past. The most thrilling thing about it, I mean, it's a very gentle novel and not necessarily a page turning, but it's sweet, and I advise it, and I think it gets some of the gentleness of that period. The most sort of interesting and sort of surprising thing in the novel is because it deals with, you know, how discombobulating the First World War was for the architecture profession and the new stuff. But the sweetest relationship in the book, which is very nice, is with his daughter. He's called Martin, and the daughter is a wonderful character who absolutely brilliantly goes to the Architectural Association and becomes a sort of early modernist. And I mean, so we can link her back to Elizabeth Scott, I think, and it's quite good about, the sort of that generational difference and the changing ways. I think as a woman of that generation who's very, very aware of the changing sort of professionalization, and this character is absolutely extraordinary. And again, I don't have a precise, but that feeling that she's part of an architectural dynasty and then doing something different must look a bit like Elizabeth Scott. If anybody knows anything more about Ashton, she's wonderful. But I sort of, here's Champneys' own house in Frognall, and it's quite good. And I just sort of, I wonder, the dates don't quite work. He dies in 1935, and the Frognall is only, it gets its modernist slap in the face, I think this is 1936. So it may have been going up the last thing he saw. But they're both very fine buildings, and I think actually it's quite worth saying, and this is one of my Politics of Prettiness sort of feelings, and it's not that these are both happening in Hampstead. It's the same sort of people and the same sort, despite style, that it's happening within the same milieu, and is doing something about how you show progress. It's nice that despite his eclecticism, it's obvious that when he came to build his own house, he wanted a little Newnham. So there it is, and that's the best bit. Yes, but his own son, and this is I just who's called Amias Champneys, and I was just sort of thinking, because I was sort of suddenly hoping for my Helen Ashton thing that I'd find. His son became a big modernist, and I'd be able to sort of link him to. But I mean, he didn't go full far from the tree. I'm not sure if he is, and if anybody could tell me if he's the Amias Champneys who dies in the First World War, which is actually something that happens to the. I haven't quite figured that out, but I'm only doing it off the cuff. That's my. Oh, I've totally run out of time. I've got so overexcited. We talked a little bit about the architect in bricks and mortar is sort of has this thing of cycling off to towns and drawing them and feeling the sort of space fit. Champneys is one of a generation of architect scholars like Jackson or the young Scott. As an architectural historian, it's pretty hopeless. I was reading a thing he wrote about Wren at the 1880 biography, and he says very little to say about his life, but this author has done all you could do within the archives, and there's very little more to say. So I mean, it's of a generation, but these pieces, and I think that the kind of thing that he's looking for. We've heard about the book of Winchelsea and Rye, but also Charterhouse and the Hospital of St Cross, and all of these end with a polemic, and this is a way of mixing together. I think he's probably slightly he's hurt by the attacks that come from the prime Gothic revivalists. I think William White, not the Jackson author, but the architect, about, and so these are all, start with the Ruskinian line, but then say that we can do this with the 18th century, and the perfect thing is, like these buildings, is a mixture. I think this building in Rye, the old grammar school, is one of the things, and he explicitly, which actually I think is what would now be called artisan mannerism, but he's seeing it as a Gothic structure with classical detail. I think one of the things that is happening in the 19th century that he's coming at the end of is St George's Hall in Liverpool, which tries to put this hugely complicated thing into a classical envelope, and it sort of breaks classics in that building. You can't go bigger. So when Street does the law courts, you just have to have a picturesque thing. And I think something like this, you can't put it in a big classical envelope. So suddenly having Gothic structure and classical detail sort of works nicely, and Rye is an important place for that. These and all of these sort of end with a version of that idea. I mean, the other about him as an antiquarian and a scholar, and this it's about feeling and sentiment as well as sort of proper antiquarianism. As I say, he thinks churches should be Gothic. I think I'm at 20 minutes, so I'll stop there because I was only meant to speak for 15, and I got overexcited. But thank you all for listening.